In 2014, the local social club closed, which was very much the heart of the village. And we realised we needed a project to sort of galvanise community spirit, because there's a real chance that obviously the community could die. If you consider it was a very, very old mining community which had very sort of close bonds. And what happened was obviously we approached the Heritage Lottery Fund initially just to sort of find out whether it was a sort of project they would support. And we worked very closely with the team there, and they gave us a lot of support and advice. And obviously we approached Remember Past and Resource in the Future and Your Good Self to look at obviously the various strands of the project to make it viable. So basically that's where it really started. And now, obviously since we had the funding, we're starting to see a groundswell of support throughout not just the village but in the outlying areas, because obviously with Facebook and Twitter and that, it's really galvanised people. It's really excited them, and hopefully when it's restored, it'll be a real sort of red letter day for the village.
Well, the school became the official custodians of the Burradon Banner in 1975, and all of the important historical artefacts to do with the community come into the school. And we've had it on display in the previous school until this school was built in 2006. When it got taken down as we came into this school, the condition of the banner meant that it couldn't be put back up here. So we knew as a community there was a restoration project that needed to take place, because the aim of Burradon is to ensure that we all know about our heritage and how we can learn from that heritage. This is the start of the final part of the jigsaw to get the banner restored, so that it can then come back into the school where it will be housed again in the main school hall. And the children will be a big part of it. They'll be researching the banner and finding out exactly what that meant at that time and how that influences their future.
Starting off at the very beginning, the process of restoring the pit banner that belonged to the colliery that used to be on the site virtually of this school. And we're going to be working with your group, Miss Murdy's class, for two terms next year. And you're going to have lots and lots of work to do. So we've come this morning to ask for your help. So we're asking you to be detectives, history detectives.
And hopefully, with the children being involved, when they get older and they've got their children, their grandchildren, they can obviously sort of tell them the story about how they were involved in the project. And they can tell obviously the stories of the people that they met and how they actually sort of were involved in the project, and that'll help to sort of maintain the village's history, its main history and its traditions as a community.
So I was approached by Chris Ray and Kath Smith in, I think it was about April 2014, about the possibility of restoring the banner. The banner eventually came here in last November 2015, and I've been working on it on and off since then. I've been working on the painted portions of the banner. It was in a very fragile state. The silk in particular was very fragile, and the actual painted part of the banner was badly torn, being repaired with gaffer tape, silver adhesive tape. I had to remove the tape, which came off reasonably easily, but all of the adhesive stayed on. When we got the tape off, it was evident how badly torn the banner was. It was decided that the image with the miner on would be the front, and the image with the building on would be the back. So all of the tears were repaired from the back. So first of all, I treated the picture with moisture and heat to get it as flat as possible, and then the tears were repaired with polyester, fine polyester material and a heat seal adhesive called Beaver 371, which is ironed into place. That consolidated all the tears and loose areas, and then I had to retouch it to hide the actual material that was used to repair the banner.
Over the years, I've worked on a large number of banners, both from the Northumberland area. All of the banners at Woodhorn I've worked on. I've been dealing with the silk, the textile element of the banner, which was in a really awful condition because of light damage and physical damage. So there were lots of holes and tears and missing areas. And what we want to do is to end up with a banner which looks as if it's complete at the end of the day. So it's safe, stable, and visually, when it's in its frame, its new frame, it'll look as if it's complete. So my work's involved dyeing up a very fine conservation net to the right colour, which I've encased the banner in, and done all the work with stitching. And the net is so fine that you can see through it. But from the point of view of the banner, it holds all those little fragments that were found in and around the school. It holds them all together. And then I'm going to put, and I've made a complete red backing for the banner, so that when it's hanging in its frame, it'll look as if it is actually all there, although we've not actually added anything to the original. I've always enjoyed working with projects that are a community-based project, because it's all to do with people and expectations and what we're going to get, and because they're so prized within the community, whether they're going to go back into the social club or in some instances into the local church, there's always that enthusiasm for seeing something that was in a pretty awful condition brought back to the stage where people can enjoy it again and know that it's going to be safe for the future.
I think the whole group of us were just absolutely overwhelmed because we'd never imagined, considering this condition when we took it up in November, that 4 months later it was in quite pristine condition. And I think for the first time, we started to realise that this was a really important project. And I think it took on a lot more meaning. The banner actually was symbolic. I mean, when we started the project, was to basically restore the village to sort of village spirit after the sort of club had closed, and the banner became like a metaphor. You know, the torn banner compared to like a torn community. And I think once we saw the banner, we knew that this was going to be a really important project for bringing people together.
So this was a shunting engine. What was a shunting engine? Right, so
I moved here in 1949 when I was married. I was only 20 years old. At that time, houses were very hard to come by, and I went to live with my mother-in-law. And there were 11 of us lived in that house. There was my mother-in-law and her husband, my father-in-law, and they had a little boy who was just 6. There was my brother-in-law and his wife, and they had a little girl just 1 year old. There was my sister-in-law and her husband, and they had a little girl about a year and a half, and there was my husband and I. And we had the single bedroom when we started our married life. And as everyone got a house, you moved up into a different room so that you had a little bit more room. And we lived there for 4 years before we got our own house. And I've lived in that house ever since. I've lived in that house 63 years now.
My brother-in-law had came back from being a prisoner of war for 3.5 years. His mother had been found dead just before he came home, and his aunt, Liza, had the Camperdown pub, and she had his coming home party there, and we were all invited, and that's where I met Bob. We put my name down at the council, and we went to live in Atkins Street with his mother. We waited 5 years before we got a council house. It was a brand new estate. There was nothing, there was no railings, anything up. They just put it in, you know, the roads were just clay. As soon as they were sort of empty, You know, they were getting a list, trying to get the council list down, and we got one of those. And that was 64 years ago, and I'm still in the same house.
One room downstairs with not a kitchen, it was just like, we used to call it the scullery, because it was tiny, and there was only room for a cooker and a sink. And I can remember when there was no water in there. I mean, you didn't have a sink. You had to go outside and get your water. But then we got cold taps put in, and then eventually we got hot taps, hot and cold. We had a tank put in. Upstairs you had 2 bedrooms. The back bedroom, which was ours, my sister and I, it had skylights, you know, in the roof. The front bedroom, my mum and dad's room, had a window like in the wall, which opened, a slidey window, it didn't open out to anything. And the toilet was over the road in the back lane, and your bath was hung on a nail in the backyard.
Nora Smith had the fish and chip shop, and everybody knew Nora, and she lived just alongside, she had this shop just alongside the mineral line, just in the middle of the village, where the mineral line used to go up to the Wheatslit and up to Backworth. And if you had a bundle of newspaper, because they used newspaper to wrap your fish and chips in those days, there was always a white paper first, and then she would wrap them in the newspaper, you know, just like a parcel. And if you took her a bundle of newspapers, she would give you a bag of scrunchums free. That was the scrunchum off the batter that was on the fish, you know how it used to gather in the pan, and she would give you that free.
I was married by then, and my father took ill, and anyway, I was summoned, and when I went in, he just put his hand out and said, you know, this is for you. And when I put my hand out, I didn't know what I was going to get, and it was the garden keys, it was the allotment keys. And I says, well, what have I got to do with these? He says, there's some tomatoes in the greenhouse, they'll need looking after, and such like in the garden, you know, in his allotment. And off I went, and that was where my love of gardening started, tending my dad's greenhouse and the tomatoes. And I must admit that year the tomatoes must have been a good year, because they were in abundance. I was giving all of the old men on the lane a few tomatoes when I was coming out of the allotment and that. We used to have a saying, if they weren't down the pit, they were either in the club or in bed or in the garden.
There was the local pubs, and there was the club, which was really the centre of the village for men meeting. Women at that point didn't go into the club at all, hardly. And it was a long, long time before women were ever allowed into the bar in the club. They did allow them to go into the concert room, because they used to have entertainment there, and they were allowed to go into the concert room, but they were never allowed in the bar.
There's no way would we ever put a foot across that doorstep, because it was the miners' club. You know, they were the ones that had built that and paid for it, so they were entitled to a little bit of privacy. They could sway and, you know, just be amongst men, and we always respected that. In fact, we found it terrible when they started, they opened the doors to women. You know, it didn't seem right at all. I think the most memories I think you can think of in Burradon was the life of the club life, because, you know, that was where people used to let go. You know, used to be able to relax and sort of get yourself prepared for another week at work. Being a miner's wife, it wasn't very good. When we were living in, and I was only 20 when I came to Burradon, and I used to have to sit up when Bob was on the 3 different shifts, 1 o'clock in the morning. And I used to be sitting there on a little stool next to the big old-fashioned fireplace with a big boiler of water, and then we used to get the zinc bath out, and he couldn't have went to bed unless somebody scrubbed his back. So I used to have to sit up, and I couldn't believe what I had to do. I think I might not have come to Burradon if I had known.
There was, if I remember rightly, 3 shifts: back shift, first shift and night shift. And my dad did mostly back shift and first shift. First shift, he was going out about 11 o'clock at night. But we lived in Office Row, and it was right just down the garden path and into the baths, because the baths were built by then. And so it was just a 2-minute walk down the garden path, and he was in, got changed and went to work. And likewise in the morning when he came in, he was out the baths and in the house, and got his breakfast straight away, Back shift, they went at 8 o'clock in the morning, I think, something like that, when we were going to school.
When he used to come in, his mother used to have an old-fashioned big iron pan, and she used to have this big jam roly-poly in. And she used to have that 1 o'clock in the morning with custard. And that was another thing, that pan was never off the old-fashioned fireplace. It was always on the grate. It was always sort of on the boil all the time. They used to use it for tea and everything, making tea and coffee. But that jam roly-poly, I can still picture it yet. It was like a bomb.
I was quite sort of apprehensive, because obviously it was the first concern is whether people would turn up. I mean, we were taking 3 buses with roughly about 150 people, and you had concerns that possibly it wasn't nice of mornings, that they would maybe just open the blinds and just say, well, I'm not going to bother. But in the credit, especially the school children, they got up so early with their parents, and they really sort of got in the spirit of the occasion. And what was really satisfying was the enthusiasm of the young parents. There were young men in their 30s and 40s who wanted to carry the banner and they wanted to be part of the whole parade. And then later on, a lot of the older men who'd come with the later sort of parties, they then obviously got involved with carrying the banner, and it was quite a sort of pleasing situation where you had people who'd seen the original banner in the 60s and the 70s when it was marched, now sort of marching the banner in the sort of in sort of 20 or 30 years later. It was quite an emotional situation, because my dad was a miner at Burradon Pit, and I remember as a child going to the Northumberland picnic, and I'd seen men from the village carrying it, and I think really it was a strong connection, a link to sort of our mining heritage, our mining past, and it was a day of us just sort of recalling sort of the remaining heritage and remaining sort of traditions from the village. The whole idea of this project was actually born from the closure of the club, and I think what we have done is it's generated interest across the generations in the village. And I think what we've done, I think we've revived a lot of the community spirit, and we've brought a lot of people in the village back together. And also we've got a lot of people who lived in the village many sort of decades ago have come back in. They've got involved in the project. So I think, you know, the one target or hope for this project was to revive community spirit, and I think we've actually exceeded any expectations. It's just been we've done 5 or 6 heritage projects, and this is the best yet, because it's brought people together. And I think, you know, in 100 years time, people might be on the internet and they might see this video and the people on it, and people might remember, you know, how special these mining communities and the people were. I grew up in this village, and I think really we took things for granted. And it's looking back in retrospect as you realise that these people were a breed apart, not just the miners, the wives and the families, and how we lived together in communities and how we could depend on each other. And I think that is that will be the legacy of this project. It will be that Burradon and its mining community has been well documented. We've got the original banner restored, and we've also got the replica and the memories of marching through Durham. And I think the reaction to the crowds as well was absolutely superb.